Hello and welcome to Bible Pebbles. I'm glad you could join us today. This time we're going to look at Ahab. He was a king of the northern tribe of Israel under the divided kingdom, with Judah in the south and Israel in the north. He was a wicked king. He was a king that worshipped a god named Baal. He had married Jezebel, who worshipped this god also, and he had caused all the people around Israel, except for a few who still worshipped Yahweh, to worship this god Baal. There was one man who stood up to King Ahab, and his name was Elijah. Elijah was a prophet and a great man of God. Now, a prophet is somebody who tells a message from God to people to warn them or to tell them to turn back to God because they're going the wrong way and they need to go a different way towards God again. Elijah comes to Ahab and tells him there's going to be a drought for 3 years, no rain, and there will be a famine as a result. There's a famine in the land, not just a famine of food, but there is a famine in the land, not just a famine of food, but a famine of true faith. There is dryness in the land because of drought, but there's also dryness in the land because of a lack of active faith amongst the majority of the people. Yes, there was still some people that worshipped Yahweh, but Elijah didn't know about them. Ahab's wickedness had not just affected him, but had affected the territory in which his kingdom in which he was ruling, and it left them spiritually wanting. This all comes together in a massive showdown on Mount Carmel. You have the prophets of Baal and you have Elijah. God wins this by bringing fire down upon an altar that's absolutely sodden with water. God shows that He is the one true God. Yahweh is who He says He is. The gods of Baal are nothing, and this is what God wanted to show. And many people realized that day that God is the one true God and chose to worship Him. Ahab does as well, but it's more lip service rather than anything else. It's just a pretense. When he goes home, he tells Jezebel about this. Now, why would a king who's in control of a kingdom, of a realm, tell his wife about something that's just happened? Who's really in control here? Well, Jezebel is absolutely furious. She had gone around already killing off any prophets of God because she wanted her religion to be the top one in the place of Yahweh. She is so furious, she sends death threats to Elijah, and this makes Elijah run for his life, and he goes into exile in the southern area of Judah, as far away, the opposite place that you can possibly get, just to get away from her. Eventually, God sends him back, and the drought ends. That's the physical drought that ends, and the famine ends. But because Ahab and Jezebel are still very, very much involved in the idolatry and the worship of Baal, the spiritual dryness and the spiritual drought and the spiritual famine doesn't end. Now, in those days, wars were very common, and it was most common for a king to be the leader of a war and to go out. The king of Syria had decided to make war with Ahab's kingdom, Israel. So Ahab gathers his troops together and he goes out to meet the Syrians, but he's got no idea what to do. He's not even a warrior. And so he has to ask somebody, and that somebody happens to be a prophet, who then tells him, well, you're the one in charge here, you've got to lead, but he doesn't seem to want to. And he goes against everything that was normally done in those days. He wins against the Syrians twice, but he doesn't depose the Syrian king as he is meant to. He lets him go. Ahab shows what a weak wanting, and wicked king that he is. In this situation, he's at war. He has to ask somebody else. Jezebel's not there to ask. Later on, Ahab wants to expand his palace grounds. And there's a chap that lives next to him called Naboth. And Naboth had a vineyard. And because it was next to the palace and Ahab was wanting to extend it, he decided he wanted Naboth's vineyard for himself, for his own garden. So he goes to Naboth and says, "Can I buy your vineyard?" And Naboth refuses and says no. Ahab goes back home, throws a temper tantrum, lies on his bed, face towards the wall, refuses to eat, and everybody's wondering what's wrong, including Jezebel. So she says to Ahab, "What's wrong? What's going on?" He tells her what has happened. So Jezebel goes with Ahab's seal and writes a letter to the elders and to the people looking after the town in which they resided. And in this letter, she basically gives a warrant for the death of Naboth. She puts Ahab's seals on it and sends it to them. And Naboth is killed as a result. Basically murdered on the orders of Jezebel. Ahab wasn't in control, Jezebel was. And the vineyard becomes his, but at what cost? It was his cost. Due to his wickedness, his total disregard for God, he wasn't even interested in following God. He was only interested in serving himself and not anyone else. And Jezebel was just as bad, if not worse. Ahab is not the one in control. Jezebel is. Ahab shows that he is a weak, wicked, wanting king. All because of Jezebel. Ahab is merely Jezebel's puppet. And Ahab ends up being such a great worry to God that judgment is pronounced on Ahab and Jezebel for their refusal to turn to God and their refusal to follow what God is wanting them to do, even though God has shown mercy time and time again to Ahab during the wars with the Syrian kings twice, but Ahab ignores it, so judgment is pronounced and Ahab and Jezebel will die. Who is really in control? That's something that we need to ask as well. We know that God is in control of all things, but we need to let him be in control of our lives, not somebody else. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.